The Saudi 9/11 pages on July 15, 2016, after 13 years of legal battles and mounting public pressure, the U.S. government finally released a document known as the 28 pages, a classified section of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11 that had been redacted since 2002. Families of victims gathered in Washington, journalists prepared for revelation, and for a brief moment, it seemed transparency had won. Then they read it, page after page of names, connections, and financial trails linking Saudi government officials to the hijackers, evidence that should have triggered investigations, indictments, perhaps even war crimes tribunals. Instead, the pages were so heavily redacted that entire paragraphs were blacked out. Names were removed, bank accounts were hidden, and the most damning sections, those detailing direct Saudi intelligence involvement, remained classified under national security exceptions. The public got 28 pages, but the full story stayed buried. The document, formally titled Part 4, Finding, Discussion and Narrative Regarding Certain Sensitive National Security Matters, was compiled in 2002 by a bipartisan congressional committee investigating intelligence failures surrounding 9/11. What they discovered was explosive. Multiple hijackers, including the ringleaders, had received financial support, logistical assistance, and safe houses from individuals connected to the Saudi government. Omar al-Bayoumi, a suspected Saudi intelligence officer, helped two hijackers find apartments in San Diego and co-signed their lease. Osama Basnan, who had ties to the Saudi royal family, received monthly payments from Princess Haifa, wife of the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., and funneled money to the hijackers. The report documented phone records, wire transfers, and meetings. It named Saudi consular officials who facilitated the hijackers' entry into the U.S. and identified a support network that extended from California to Florida. Investigators found a pattern. Nearly every hijacker had touched nodes in a web that led back to Saudi Arabia. Yet when the 9/11 Commission released its final report in 2004, these connections were minimized, attributed to rogue elements rather than state sponsorship. The 28 pages were kept classified by President Bush, then by President Obama, who repeatedly denied requests to release them, citing potential harm to U.S.-Saudi relations. When the document was finally declassified in 2016, it was incomplete. The redactions were so extensive that senators who had read the original unredacted version said the public release was misleading. Key names were blacked out. Financial flows were obscured. Senator Bob Graham, who chaired the original inquiry, stated publicly that the redactions protected Saudi officials from prosecution. If the connections were innocent, why redact them? And if they implicated a U.S. ally in the worst terrorist attack on American soil, who decided that alliance was worth more than justice? The full CIA torture report. On December 9, 2014, the Senate Intelligence Committee released a 500-page summary of its investigation into CIA interrogation practices following 9/11. The report was damning. Systematic torture, medically supervised abuse, and interrogation techniques that violated international law. Waterboarding, rectal feeding, sleep deprivation lasting over a week. Prisoners held in coffin-sized boxes. The CIA had lied to Congress, destroyed evidence, and spied on the Senate investigators themselves. The summary was horrifying, but it was only 7% of the full report. The complete investigation, 6,700 pages detailing specific operations, naming officials who authorized torture, and documenting which world leaders approved black sites on their soil, remains classified. Every copy is locked in government vaults, inaccessible to the public, journalists, prosecutors, or even most members of Congress. The investigation took 5 years and cost $40 million. Senate staffers reviewed over 6 million CIA documents, constructing a detailed account of the agency's detention and interrogation program. What they found contradicted everything the CIA had told Congress. The agency claimed torture produced critical intelligence that stopped attacks. The report proved it didn't. Most actionable intelligence came from traditional interrogation before torture began. The CIA claimed it briefed Congress fully. The report showed the agency systematically lied, providing false information and hiding the program's brutality, even from oversight committees. The full report names names. It identifies which psychologists designed the torture program and were paid $81 million. It details which allied governments hosted secret prisons: Thailand, Poland, Romania, Lithuania. It describes specific prisoners, including those who were tortured to death or turned out to be innocent. It documents CIA officers who objected and were silenced, and officials who destroyed videotapes of interrogations to avoid prosecution. This is not speculation. Senate investigators confirmed all of this, documented it meticulously, and placed it in the full report. The public will never see it. After the summary's release, CIA Director John Brennan called for the full report to be destroyed. Some senators urged President Obama to declassify it. Obama refused. The report was sent to every federal agency, with copies locked in safes, classified top secret indefinitely. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who oversaw the investigation, said the full report would stand as the definitive record of CIA torture, but only if it's eventually released. As of now, there is no declassification timeline. No FOIA request can access it. If torture was a mistake, why not release the evidence? And if it was a crime, who decided the criminals should write the classification rules? The Tiananmen death count. On the night of June 3, 1989, as Chinese military convoys rolled toward Tiananmen Square, a British diplomatic cable was being drafted in Beijing. Sir Alan Donald, the UK ambassador to China, had received intelligence from a trusted source inside the Chinese Communist Party, someone with direct access to the State Council. The cable, sent to London the following day, contained a number that would never appear in official Chinese records: 10,000. That was the estimated death toll from the military crackdown on pro-democracy protesters, not the 300 that China would eventually acknowledge, not even the 3,000 that international observers suspected. 10,000 civilians gunned down, crushed by tanks, or beaten to death in a single night. The cable was classified secret and locked in British archives for decades. Meanwhile, in China, every document related to the massacre, military orders, hospital records, death certificates, internal party communications, was systematically destroyed or sealed under state secrecy laws that carry prison sentences withheld. Disclosure. The Chinese government's official account claims that nearly 300 people died during the June 4th incident, mostly soldiers defending themselves from violent rioters. But the evidence suggests something far more systematic. Declassified cables from multiple foreign governments, US, Australian, and British, describe a coordinated military assault. Troops were ordered to clear the square at any cost. Soldiers fired indiscriminately into crowds. Tanks ran over protesters, including those trying to surrender. Hospitals were surrounded by police who arrested the wounded and confiscated medical records. Doctors who treated gunshot victims were forbidden from documenting causes of death. The most damning documents are those that never left China, because they no longer exist. Internal military communications detailing rules of engagement were reportedly destroyed within weeks of the massacre. Hospital intake logs from Beijing's trauma centers vanished. Death certificates were altered or never issued. Families seeking information about missing loved ones were threatened into silence. Photographs taken by Chinese journalists were confiscated. Foreign film footage was seized at the airport. The Chinese government has spent 35 years erasing not just the dead, but the evidence that they ever existed. In 2017, under President Xi Jinping, a new directive was issued. All remaining documents related to Tiananmen, held in regional archives, were to be transferred to central control or destroyed. Researchers who had been quietly studying the event were warned to cease. Universities purged libraries of books mentioning the massacre. Even online references are scrubbed in real time. Searching June 4, 1989 on Chinese internet returns nothing. The British cable was finally declassified in 2017, revealing the 10,000 figure. China dismissed it as fake news, but they have never released their own records. If only 300 died, why destroy every document? And if 10,000 were killed, who decided that silence was more important than acknowledging their existence? Clinton's deleted emails. On March 27, 2015, Hillary Clinton's attorney, David Kendall, sent a letter to the House Select Committee on Benghazi. The letter confirmed what investigators had suspected. Clinton had used a private email server during her tenure as Secretary of State, conducting government business through a personal account rather than the official State Department system. The committee immediately issued a subpoena demanding all emails be preserved and turned over. But by the time the subpoena arrived, the deletion had already begun. Using a software program called BleachBit, designed to permanently erase data beyond forensic recovery, Clinton's team wiped 33,000 emails from the server. These weren't casual correspondences. They covered 4 years of her time as America's top diplomat, a period that included the Libya intervention, the Syrian civil war, the Russia reset, and the rise of ISIS. Clinton claimed the deleted emails were personal. Yoga routines, wedding plans, nothing of public interest. But no one could verify that because the emails were gone forever. The controversy began when it was revealed that Clinton had set up a private server in her home in Chappaqua, New York, shortly before becoming Secretary of State in 2009. All official communications, classified briefings, diplomatic cables, policy discussions flowed through this unsecured system, bypassing government oversight and record-keeping requirements. Federal law requires government officials to preserve work-related communications. Clinton's use of a private server violated this policy, and potentially laws regarding the handling of classified information. When the server's existence became public, Clinton's team claimed they would hand over all work-related emails. They produced roughly 30,000, but 33,000 others, they said, were personal and therefore deleted. The timing of the deletion raised immediate suspicion. The emails were erased in March 2015, weeks after the House committee subpoenaed them, and just as the FBI was preparing to investigate Clinton's handling of classified material. BleachBit doesn't just delete files. It overwrites them multiple times, making recovery impossible even with advanced forensic tools. It's the digital equivalent of shredding documents, dousing them in acid and burning the remains. The FBI recovered fragments, enough to confirm that classified information had indeed passed through the server, including emails marked top secret. But the full scope of what was deleted remains unknown. Congressional investigators suspected the missing emails might reveal something beyond classification breaches, potential conflicts of interest involving the Clinton Foundation. During her time as Secretary of State, the foundation received millions in foreign donations, some from governments seeking favorable treatment from the U.S. State Department. Did those donors receive special access? Were policy decisions influenced by contributions? The deleted emails might have answered those questions, or they might have exonerated her. But we'll never know. If the emails were truly personal, why use military-grade deletion software? And if they weren't, who decided 33,000 pieces of evidence should vanish before anyone could read them? The MH17 satellite data. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was cruising at 33,000 feet over eastern Ukraine when it vanished from radar. Within seconds, wreckage began raining down over farmland in the Donetsk region, scattering bodies and debris across miles of rebel-controlled territory. All 298 passengers and crew were dead. Within hours, both sides accused each other. Ukraine blamed Russian-backed separatists for firing a surface-to-air missile. Russia blamed the Ukrainian military. The world demanded answers. And the United States, which had satellite coverage of the area at the exact moment of impact, claimed it had definitive proof of who fired the missile. Secretary of State John Kerry appeared on television within days, stating the U.S. possessed evidence from social media, intelligence, and satellite imagery showing the missile launch. But the raw satellite data, the actual images, radar tracks, and signals intelligence, has never been released. It remains classified, locked in Pentagon and CIA vaults, inaccessible to investigators, victims' families, or the international tribunal prosecuting the case. The shootdown occurred during the height of the Ukraine conflict, in an area where Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian forces were locked in combat. A Malaysian civilian airliner, flying an approved international route, was hit by what investigators would later confirm as a Russian-made Buk missile. But the critical question wasn't the weapon. It was who fired it and who gave the order. The U.S. immediately released a statement blaming pro-Russian separatists supported by Moscow. Intelligence officials briefed reporters, showing selective satellite images of alleged Buk launchers moving through rebel territory. But they never released the full intelligence package, the actual satellite footage, the radar data showing the missile's trajectory, or signals intercepts that could identify the launch crew. The Dutch Safety Board led the international investigation and concluded in 2015 that a Russian Buk missile downed the plane. But their report was based on circumstantial evidence, missile fragments, blast patterns, and witness testimony. They never accessed the U.S. satellite data directly. Requests to the U.S. government for the raw intelligence were denied, with officials citing national security and protection of sources and methods. Russia claimed this was proof the U.S. was hiding something, that the data would exonerate Russia or implicate Ukraine. The U.S. insisted releasing it would compromise intelligence capabilities. In 2016, international prosecutors charged 4 individuals, 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian separatist, with murder. The trial, held in absentia, relied on intercepted phone calls and witness testimony. The satellite data that could have definitively identified the launch site, the chain of command, and whether Russian military personnel were directly involved. Still classified. If the evidence confirms what the US claims, why not release it? And if it shows something else, who decided 298 lives weren't worth the transparency? The Iraq WMD fabrication. On July 23, 2002, 9 months before the invasion of Iraq, a group of Tony Blair's senior advisors gathered at 10 Downing Street for a classified briefing. Among them was Sir Richard Dearlove, head of MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service. Dearlove had just returned from Washington, where he'd met with CIA Director George Tenet and senior Bush administration officials. What he reported to the room was extraordinary and would later be documented in meeting minutes that were never meant to see daylight. Military action was now seen as inevitable, Dearlove told the group. Bush wanted to remove Saddam through military action, justified by the conjunction of terrorism and WMD, but the intelligence and facts were being fixed around the policy. In other words, the decision to invade had already been made, and intelligence was being manipulated to justify it. This memo, later known as the Downing Street Memo, was leaked in 2005. But it was only one document. The full archive of intelligence assessments, internal communications, and classified briefings that would prove Bush and Blair knowingly fabricated the WMD threat remains sealed under national security laws in both the US and UK. The Iraq War was sold to the public on a singular claim. Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and posed an imminent threat. In September 2002, the British government published a dossier titled Iraq's Weapons of Mass Destruction, the Assessment of the British Government. The document claimed Iraq could deploy chemical and biological weapons within 45 minutes. It cited aluminum tubes as evidence of a nuclear program. It described mobile weapons labs and stockpiles of anthrax. Prime Minister Blair told Parliament the evidence was extensive, detailed, and authoritative. President Bush echoed the claims in his 2003 State of the Union address, citing British intelligence. Congress authorized war. The invasion began in March 2003. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. Not one chemical warhead, not one biological agent, not one active nuclear program. The aluminum tubes were for conventional rockets. The mobile labs were hydrogen production units. The 45-minute claim was based on a single uncorroborated source who later admitted he fabricated it. Weapons inspectors had told both governments before the invasion that Iraq's WMD programs had been dismantled. Intelligence analysts at the CIA and MI6 expressed doubts, yet the war proceeded, killing over 500,000 people and destabilizing an entire region. Post-war inquiries in both countries, the Butler Review in the UK and the Senate Intelligence Committee report in the US, confirmed that intelligence had been exaggerated, misrepresented, and selectively presented. But the most damaging documents, internal memos showing Bush and Blair, were warned the evidence was weak, communications revealing they knew inspections were working, and meetings where the legal justification for war was questioned, remain classified. The UK's Chilcot inquiry, which investigated the war, was denied access to critical Blair-Bush communications. When excerpts were finally released in 2016, key sections were redacted. If the intelligence was genuinely believed, why hide the internal discussions? And if Bush and Blair knew the threat was fabricated, who decided those lies should stay classified forever? The JFK CIA files. On October 26, 2017, the National Archives released over 2,800 previously classified documents related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. The release was mandated by the JFK Records Act of 1992, which required all assassination-related materials to be made public by October 2017, 25 years after the law's passage. Researchers, historians, and conspiracy theorists prepared for revelation. Then, at the last moment, President Trump blocked the full release, citing requests from the CIA and FBI. Thousands of pages remained redacted. Names were blacked out. Entire documents were withheld. In 2021, President Biden extended the classification again. And in 2023, another partial release came with still more redactions. As of now, over 4,000 documents related to Kennedy's murder remain fully or partially classified, 60 years after his death. The reason given: protecting intelligence sources and methods. The real question: what could possibly justify hiding evidence from a 1963 murder investigation in 2024? The official story is well known. Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, shot Kennedy from the Texas School Book Depository. The Warren Commission concluded this in 1964 after a 10-month investigation. But almost immediately, inconsistencies emerged. Oswald had lived in the Soviet Union. He had been monitored by the CIA and FBI. He had connections to anti-Castro Cuban exiles and visited the Soviet embassy in Mexico City weeks before the assassination. The CIA had a file on him, a thick one. When the House Select Committee on Assassinations reinvestigated in 1976, they concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Though they couldn't identify the conspirators, they found evidence of intelligence agency failures and possible cover-ups, but key documents were still classified. The JFK Records Act was supposed to end the secrecy. Congress, responding to public pressure after Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK, mandated full disclosure. Agencies were given 25 years to review and release everything. But when the deadline arrived, the CIA and FBI pushed back, arguing that certain files still contained sensitive information about assets, operations, and foreign liaisons. Presidents Trump and Biden both deferred to these agencies, extending classification despite having the authority to override them. The files that remain sealed reportedly include CIA operational cables related to Oswald's activities in Mexico, FBI surveillance records of Oswald before the assassination, and documents detailing what U.S. intelligence knew about threats to Kennedy's life. Critics point out that any human sources mentioned in 1963 files would now be over 80 years old or dead. Any operations would be long concluded. The sources and methods argument no longer holds. So why keep hiding? If Oswald acted alone, the files would confirm it. And if he didn't, who decided the truth about a president's murder should stay secret for a century? Nixon's 18 minutes on June 20th, 1972, 3 days after the Watergate break-in, President Richard Nixon met with his Chief of Staff, H.R. Haldeman, in the Oval Office. The conversation was recorded, as all Nixon's conversations were, by the secret taping system he'd installed. That recording would later become the most infamous piece of evidence in American political history. Not for what it contained, but for what was missing. When White House counsel discovered the tape's existence in 1973 and was forced to turn them over to prosecutors, one tape stood out. The June 20th conversation between Nixon and Haldeman contained an 18.5-minute gap. Not silence, not accidental recording failure, a deliberate manual erasure. Experts confirmed the tape had been erased and re-recorded over at least 5 separate times using the Stop Erase Record function on the machine. Nixon's secretary, Rose Mary Woods, claimed she had accidentally erased it while transcribing by holding down the record button with her foot while stretching to answer the phone, a position later demonstrated to be physically impossible. The content of those 18 minutes, what Nixon said 3 days after his operatives were caught breaking into Democratic headquarters, has never been recovered. The gap occurs at the most critical moment. June 20th, 1972 was the first time Nixon and Haldeman discussed the break-in in detail. Prior tapes show Nixon was informed about the arrests but claimed ignorance of their purpose. The June 20th conversation would have revealed what Nixon knew, when he knew it, and what he ordered done about it. Instead, there's only a buzz, a low hum where words should be. Prosecutors suspected the erasure contained Nixon's direct orders to cover up the break-in, pay hush money to the burglars, or obstruct the FBI's investigation. Any of those statements would have been immediate grounds for impeachment. When the gap was discovered, Nixon's legal team claimed it was an accident, but audio forensics experts hired by the court concluded otherwise. The erasure required deliberate, repeated actions. Someone had manually stopped, rewound, and re-recorded over the same section multiple times. Woods testified she might have accidentally erased 5 minutes, but couldn't explain the full 18. Haldeman, who was present during the conversation, claimed he couldn't remember what was said. Nixon himself offered no explanation. The Watergate special prosecutor considered charging Woods with obstruction of justice, but ultimately declined, unable to prove intent. Nixon resigned in 1974 before impeachment could proceed. Haldeman went to prison for conspiracy and obstruction. Woods took the secret to her grave in 2005. Modern audio restoration technology has been applied to the tape multiple times, most recently in 2003. Experts concluded the conversation is unrecoverable. The original magnetic signature was completely overwritten. If the 18 minutes were harmless, why erase them? And if they contained proof of Nixon's direct involvement in the cover-up, who decided to destroy the evidence? And did Nixon himself give the order? The Lockerbie oil deal. On December 21st, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 people, 259 on the plane and 11 on the ground. Investigators traced the bomb to Libyan intelligence agents acting under orders from Muammar Gaddafi. For years, Libya denied involvement. Then, in 1999, under mounting international pressure and crippling sanctions, Gaddafi agreed to hand over 2 suspects for trial. One, Abdelbasset al-Megrahi, was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to life in a Scottish prison. He served 8 years. Then, in August 2009, he was released on compassionate grounds, supposedly dying of cancer with only months to live. He returned to Libya a hero and lived another 3 years. The official explanation was humanitarian, but leaked documents told a different story. Britain had negotiated his release as part of a secret deal to secure oil contracts with Libya worth billions. The full terms of that agreement, letters between Tony Blair and Gaddafi, Foreign Office memos, and BP's role in the negotiations, remain sealed under the UK Official Secrets Act. The suspicions began immediately. Megrahi's release came just as BP was finalizing a $900 million oil exploration deal with Libya. British officials had visited Tripoli multiple times in the months prior, not to discuss justice, but energy contracts. Megrahi's medical prognosis, 3 months to live, was disputed by other oncologists who reviewed his case and said he could survive years. Victims' families were outraged. U.S. officials who had jurisdiction because 189 victims were American condemned the release as a betrayal. Scotland's government, which officially made the decision, insisted it was based solely on compassionate grounds. But leaked correspondence revealed the British government had actively lobbied for his release. In 2010, the Sunday Times obtained letters showing that Jack Straw, Britain's Justice Secretary, had discussed Megrahi with Libyan officials during negotiations over oil and gas deals. A prisoner transfer agreement between the UK and Libya had been signed in 2007, conveniently, as BP pursued contracts. Straw admitted that excluding Megrahi from the agreement would have been difficult to justify. When confronted, he claimed trade considerations were not the overwhelming factor, an admission that they were a factor. Documents obtained through Freedom of Information requests were heavily redacted. Full communications between Blair, Gaddafi, BP executives, and Foreign Office officials remain classified for at least 30 years. In 2011, Gaddafi was overthrown and killed. Any hope of full disclosure died with him. Megrahi died in 2012, never revealing whether he acted alone or under orders. The documents that could answer whether Britain traded justice for oil, whether 270 lives were worth a business deal, remain locked away. If the release was purely humanitarian, why classify the negotiations? And if it was a deal, who decided those families didn't deserve to know? The Vatican Nazi ratlines. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin, thousands of Nazi officials, SS officers, and war criminals began fleeing Germany. Many headed south, through Austria and into Italy, following escape routes that would later be known as ratlines. These weren't improvised escapes. They were organized networks providing false papers, safe houses, and travel documents that allowed fugitives to reach sympathetic countries in South America, particularly Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. And at the center of these networks, according to declassified intelligence reports and survivor testimony, was the Vatican. Catholic clergy, working through relief organizations and church properties, allegedly provided logistical support, forged Red Cross passports, and used Vatican diplomatic channels to smuggle war criminals out of Europe. Thousands escaped justice this way, including Adolf Eichmann, Josef Mengele, and Klaus Barbie. The full scope of the Vatican's involvement, documented in internal church records, correspondence between bishops and the Vatican Secretariat of State, and financial records showing funding sources, remains sealed in the Vatican's secret archives, inaccessible to historians and prosecutors. The ratlines operated through a network of Catholic bishops and priests, most notably Croatian priest Krunoslav Draganović and Austrian bishop Alois Hudal. Hudal was explicit about his mission. He believed anti-communism justified protecting former Nazis. He ran a seminary in Rome that became a processing center for fugitives. Draganović operated out of the Pontificio Collegio Croato using church funds and forged documents to move war criminals. Both had access to Vatican resources and diplomatic immunity. U.S. intelligence knew about the operations. Declassified CIA and Army CIC documents from the 1940s and 50s confirm that American officials tracked the rat lines and in some cases used them to exfiltrate Nazi scientists and intelligence assets they wanted to recruit. What remains unknown is the level of direct Vatican knowledge and approval. Did Pope Pius XII authorize these operations, or were they the actions of rogue clergy? Internal church documents could answer this. Letters between Hudal, Draganovich, and Vatican officials exist in the archives. Financial records show money flowing through church accounts to fund escapes. Lists of fugitives aided by the Vatican were reportedly compiled by church officials. But the Vatican has never opened these files. Requests from historians, governments, and victims' advocacy groups are denied. The Church claims the documents are sensitive and that releasing them could harm interfaith relations or misrepresent the Church's wartime actions. In 2020, Pope Francis opened some archives related to Pius XII's papacy, but files specifically related to rat-line operations remain restricted. If the Vatican's role was limited or misunderstood, why not release the evidence? And if Catholic institutions knowingly helped mass murderers escape, who decided protecting the Church's reputation mattered more than justice for millions of victims?